So one of the things I think is important to note is that here is an iteration of a movement that squarely placed its critique on the state. This is about state-sanctioned violences of many types. And it makes sense to me why it is that folk would be resistant to not only providing endorsement, but to supporting the state and anyone representing it when the state is actually the object of critique. But there are issues beyond policing. So policing, overcriminalization and policing in communities, environmental health concerns like in Flint, Michigan, unemployment, undocumented status of people of color. There's so many other areas that are of concern that haven't actually been sort of spelled out and broken down by candidates in ways that speak to the needs of Black Lives Matter organizers. I should also say you have to remember that this is a multi-generational movement. There are people who are on the streets and involved in this movement who were there in '96 when the Welfare Reform Act was passed. They were there in 1994 when the Violent Crime Act was passed. They have a sense of how Clinton had a part in the doing, in proliferating and spreading a lot of the problems that we're talking about now. And then there are some who may have lacked that political consciousness who's coming to it now.
I want to go back to 1994, what you're referring to, Darnell. When Hillary Clinton appeared on C-SPAN to back the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act.
We keep going. With respect to the crime bill, I think as more Americans focus on the fact that this bill would have put more police on the street, would have locked up violent offenders so they never could get out again, would have given more prison construction money available to the states and as well as the federal government, but also would have dealt with prevention, giving young people something to say yes to. It's a very well thought out crime bill that is both smart and tough. I think Americans are going to say, why these political games? Why are we once again letting certain special interests call the shots in Washington? And we will eventually get a good crime bill like the president has proposed. It'll just take a little longer than it should have.
That was Hillary Clinton back in 1994. I wanted to turn to Michelle Alexander, the author of the new Jim Crow Mass Incarceration, The Age of Color Blindness, who recently wrote on her Facebook page, quote, "If anyone doubts the mainstream media fails to tell the truth about our political system and its true winners and losers, the spectacle of large majorities of black folks supporting Hillary Clinton in the primary races ought to be proof enough." She said, "I can't believe Hillary would be coasting into the primaries with her current margin of black support if most people knew how much damage the Clintons have done, the millions of families that were destroyed the last time they were in the White House, thanks to their boastful embrace of the mass incarceration machine and their total capitulation to the right-wing narrative on race, crime, welfare, and taxes."
So let's look at the statistics. The United States is home to 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners. Think about that. Our incarceration rate is 4 times higher than China's. We keep more people behind bars than the top 35 European countries combined. And it hasn't always been the case, this huge explosion in incarceration rates. In 1980, there were 500,000 people behind bars in America. 500,000 people in 1980. I was in college in 1980. Many of you were not born in 1980, that's okay. I remember 1980, 500,000. Today, there are 2.2 million. It has quadrupled since 1980. Our prison population has doubled in the last 2 decades alone. Now, we need to be honest. There are a lot of folks who belong in prison. If we're gonna deal with this problem and the inequities involved, then we also have to speak honestly. There are some folks who need to be in jail. They may have had terrible things happen to them in their lives. We hold out the hope for redemption, but they've done some bad things. Murderers, predators, rapists, gang leaders, drug kingpins. We need some of those folks behind bars. Our communities are safer thanks to brave police officers and hardworking prosecutors who put those violent criminals in jail. And the studies show that up to a certain point, tougher prosecutors and stiffer sentences for these violent offenders contributed to the decline in violent crime over the last few decades. Although the science also indicates that you get a point of diminishing returns. But it is important for us to recognize that violence in our communities is serious, and that historically, in fact, the African American community oftentimes was under-policed rather than over-policed. Folks were very interested in containing the African American community so it couldn't leave segregated areas, but within those areas, there wasn't enough police presence. But here's the thing. Over the last few decades, we've also locked up more and more nonviolent drug offenders than ever before for longer than ever before. And that is the real reason our prison population is so high. In far too many cases, the punishment simply does not fit the crime. If you're a low-level drug dealer or you violate your parole, you owe some debt to society. You have to be held accountable and make amends. But you don't owe 20 years. You don't owe a life sentence. That's disproportionate to the price that should be paid. And by the way, the taxpayers are picking up the tab for that price. Every year we spend $80 billion to keep folks incarcerated. $80 billion. Now, just to put that in perspective, for $80 billion, we could have universal preschool for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old in America. That's what $80 billion buys. For $80 billion, we could double the salary of every high school teacher in America. For $80 billion, we could finance new roads and new bridges and new airports, job training programs, research and development. We're about to get into a big budget debate in Washington, what I couldn't do with $80 billion. It's a lot of money. For what we spend to keep everyone locked up for 1 year, we could eliminate tuition at every single one of our public colleges and universities. As Republican Senator and presidential candidate Rand Paul has said. No, and to his credit, he's been consistent on this issue. Imprisoning large numbers of nonviolent drug offenders for long periods of time costs the taxpayers money without making them any safer. Roughly 1/3 of the Justice Department's budget now goes toward incarceration. 1/3. And there are outstanding public servants at our Justice Department, starting with our outstanding Attorney General, Loretta Lynch. And we've got some great prosecutors here today. And they do outstanding work, so many of them. But every dollar they have to spend keeping nonviolent drug offenders in prison is a dollar they can't spend going after drug kingpins, or tracking down terrorists, or hiring more police, and giving them the resources that would allow them to do a more effective job community policing. And then, of course, there are the costs that can't be measured in dollars and cents. Because the statistics on who gets incarcerated show that by a wide margin, it disproportionately impacts communities of color. African Americans and Latinos make up 30% of our population. They make up 60% of our inmates. About 1 in every 35 African American men, 1 in every 88 Latino men is serving time right now. Among white men, that number is 1 in 214. The bottom line is that in too many places, black boys and black men, Latino boys and Latino men, experience being treated differently under the law.
Bilderberg always insists on a media blackout. By June of 2008, we had already figured out that Barack Obama was the elite's puppet of choice. The national media claimed that during the weekend the Bilderberg group was scheduled to meet, that Obama had speaking engagements set for Chicago and the Midwest. We knew better. In a classic bait-and-switch, the Obama campaign told the press corps to get on Obama's campaign plane, and that Obama would join them on the flight to Chicago. Campaign staff then slammed the door shut. The fawning press had been shanghaied as Obama's campaign aircraft lifted off without Obama.
Robert, why were we not told about this meeting and that the senator wouldn't be on our flight until the doors were shut and we were about to taxi to take off?
Again, we had a desire. Senator Obama had a desire to do some meetings. Others had a desire to meet with him tonight in a private way, and that's what we're doing. We set up these meetings. They're being done tonight. Again,
Is there more than one meeting? Is there more than one person with whom?
I'm not going to get into all the details of the meetings. I don't know that I've got a ton more different answers for all of your questions.
Obama wasn't going to Chicago. He had a meeting to attend, a secret meeting.
Initially, it was believed that the secret meeting took place at Clinton's Washington, D.C. home. Obama's spokesman denied that, but won't confirm where the former rivals met. He also declined to comment on their topics of discussion.
For a day and a half, the mainstream media engaged in a wild goose chase, trying to find out where Hillary and Obama had gone. 3 cover stories later, the corporate press had to admit they had no idea where the 2 candidates had gone. And to this day, Clinton and Obama aren't talking.
Plenty of sources knew about this meeting, told us and others that it was at Hillary Clinton's house, but clearly it wasn't.